If you're watching this, you're already closer to this than you should be. I don't mean that in a dramatic, clickbait way. I mean it literally. There are things you aren't supposed to know about search and rescue, and there are calls you're never supposed to answer. This is about one of those calls. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m., not my personal phone, the SAR duty line. That alone wasn't strange. People get lost at night all the time. What made my stomach tighten was the caller ID. No GPS coordinates, no ping radius, just a name and a number floating where the location data should have been. Search and rescue, I said, already reaching for a pen. Training takes over before fear does. There was breathing on the other end, slow, steady, too calm for someone who'd been missing for 3 days. I think I found a trail, the man said. His voice kept cutting in and out like it was being pulled through water. Can you hear me now? I could, that was the problem. The area he was supposedly calling from was a dead zone. Everyone knew that. We warned hikers about it. We had maps posted. We tested it ourselves. No signal in or out ever. I asked him for landmarks. He described things that matched our maps perfectly, down to a fallen pine we'd marked during a training exercise last spring. Then he laughed quietly like he'd said something funny to himself. You're not supposed to answer, he added. They tell you not to ask why. That's when my radio crackled to life on its own. No call sign. Just one sentence, repeated twice, bleeding static into the room like a bad memory you can't shake. Do not engage. My partner looked at me from across the room, eyes wide. He shook his head, slow and deliberate. We'd all heard the stories, the calls that looped, the voices that learned, the ones that didn't want to be found, just acknowledged. The man on the phone said my name. Not the one on my badge, the one my mother used when she was angry. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the forest must have been listening for a very long time there. I didn't tell my supervisor, I didn't log the call. I stayed on the line longer than protocol allowed, listening as the signal faded into something wet and whispering. Before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand how search and rescue normally works. People think search and rescue is constant panic, screaming radios, helicopters cutting through storms. Most of the time, it's paperwork, clipboards, checklists, coffee gone cold while you wait for someone to call in late. The safe version of the job is almost boring, and that's how we like it. Daylight searches start with maps spread across folding tables, fingers tracing trails everyone has walked 100 times. We log names, pack weights, weather reports. We remind hikers to stay put, and most of them do. They twist an ankle, miss a turn, get scared when the sun drops. We go in, we bring them out, and they thank us with shaking hands and apologies that don't need to be said. My team joked to keep the edge off. Mason complained about overtime. Kelly kept snacks hidden in her pack like contraband. Someone always forgot spare batteries and someone else always had extras. There was comfort in how predictable it all was. Familiar voices over the radio, familiar mistakes, familiar relief when boots emerged from the tree line. Training manuals make it sound clean. Follow procedure. Establish last known point. Expand your grid. Trust your equipment. The manuals don't mention the things you learn standing around a truck at midnight listening to the forest breathe. They don't tell you about areas marked off with faded tape and no explanation, or why certain coordinates never make it into the digital logs. Every team has stories they don't write down, hours lived in half-finished sentences and looks exchanged when a rookie asked the wrong question. I remember asking once why a particular ravine was excluded from our search radius. The room went quiet. Then Dan, who'd been doing this longer than I'd been alive, shrugged and said, "You'll know when it's not normal." That was the end of it. No meeting, no warning, just an understanding that some knowledge was earned the hard way or not at all. At night, the work changes. Radios sound louder, distances feel longer. Your headlamp turns trees into watching shapes. We joked about it, sure, but everyone knew daylight rules didn't always apply after dark. That's when you paid attention to things that didn't fit the checklist, sounds that repeated, footprints that stopped too cleanly, calls that came in without data attached. Officially, every incident gets logged. Unofficially, some reports stayed thin on details. A missing hour here, a vague description there, nothing you could point to and say this is wrong, just enough to make you uneasy if you thought about it too long. I told myself all of that was coincidence, pattern seeking where none existed. That night calls felt strange because nights always do. I believed the job was exactly what it said it was: find people, bring them home, move on. That belief lasted right up until the first time something didn't add up. I should have remembered the looks, the pauses, the way certain conversations died when the radios were on. I should have noticed how often veterans checked the tree line before answering simple questions. All of that was there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for a moment when denial became impossible. When that moment came, it didn't arrive loudly. It arrived quietly, on a line that wasn't supposed to work, from a place that wasn't supposed to answer back. And that was before the call that broke every rule we pretended didn't exist, the one that forced me to stop believing in safe versions of this job, before fear had a voice, before the forest learned my name. I didn't know then that normal was just a story we told ourselves to sleep better, and that some nights the wilderness listens for answers instead. That was the night, waiting, patient and unrecorded, just beyond the edges of our maps, where everything we ignored finally started paying attention to us that mattered. We found him just after sunrise, which should have felt like a win. The radio call went out, voices tight with relief, coordinates rattled off between static pops, missing hiker located, alive, conscious. When I reached him, he was standing in the middle of the trail like he'd been waiting for us, clothes torn but clean in places they shouldn't have been. His boots were laced perfectly, no limp, no panic. He smiled when he saw us, slow and careful, like he was copying something he'd seen before but didn't fully understand yet. Protocol kicked in. Check for injuries, check pupils, offer water. He accepted everything with polite nods, repeating thank you in the same flat tone every time. Relief buzzed through the team, that familiar rush of a job almost done. Then I asked where he'd been and his smile twitched. Off trail, he said. Just off. I asked him to show us on the map. He pointed to a spot that didn't exist, a blank fold of paper between contour lines. Dan frowned and shook his head. That coordinate isn't on any chart, he said, trying to keep it light. The man shrugged. It's there, he replied. It just doesn't like being written down. He said it casually, like commenting on the weather. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. He hadn't looked confused once. No dehydration, delirium, no shock. He was calm in a way that didn't match 3 nights alone in the woods. As we walked him out, he kept murmuring a phrase under his breath. Don't follow the echo, he said, over and over like a prayer or a warning. Kelly asked who told him that. He looked at her, eyes sharp for the first time, and said, You did, later. Nobody laughed. The forest around us felt too quiet, like it was listening to make sure he remembered the words correctly. At base camp, medics cleared him faster than they should have. Vitals perfect, no infection, no explanation. He refused to answer questions about where he'd slept or what he'd eaten. Every time someone pushed, he repeated the same phrase, don't follow the echo. He asked for a phone, then stopped himself, shaking his head. Bad idea, he whispered. That's how it notices you. Paperwork demanded details we didn't have. His route made no sense. His timeline folded in on itself. Dan quietly removed 1 page from the report and slid it into his pocket. Unlogged, he muttered, barely moving his lips. That was my first real look at how things disappeared without explanation, not lost, removed. The man sat on the bench, humming softly, eyes tracking something beyond the tree line that none of us could see. They transferred him to the hospital that afternoon. I thought that was the end of it. People go missing again all the time, especially the ones who don't want to be found. but the security footage showed him walking out of his room at 3:12 a.m., barefoot, gown neatly folded on the bed. Cameras glitched as he passed. No alarms. No one remembered seeing him leave. His trail ended at the parking lot, footprints stopping cleanly in the middle of the asphalt. A week later, a call came in from another county. Hiker sighted matching his description, miles away, near terrain none of us recognized. The phrase showed up again in the notes, written by a dispatcher who swore she didn't remember typing it. Don't follow the echo. Dan told me to forget about it. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Pattern case, he said quietly. You don't chase those. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. Trauma does strange things. People say odd things when they're scared, but at night I'd hear his voice in my head, calm and borrowed, explaining rules I didn't remember learning. Some places don't just lose people, he'd said. They keep a copy. That was the first time I realized rescue doesn't always mean saving. Before I go any further, I need to be clear about something. What you're hearing now is not what ends up in the reports. Officially, cases are neat. Dates, times, outcomes, missing located, search suspended, file closed. Anything that doesn't fit gets softened, summarized, or removed entirely because the system isn't built to handle maybes. If you've read enough of these stories, you've already noticed it. Different usernames, different states, same details slipping through the cracks. A phrase repeated, a place no one can map. A responder saying they were warned but never told why. Those aren't coincidences. They're what leaks out when people try to be honest without getting shut down. I've seen the posts, the late-night Reddit threads you scroll past and forget by morning. Search and rescue confessions, park ranger horror stories, comments arguing about fiction versus fact. We read them too, quietly, screens dimmed. Nobody admits it, but when a new case comes in, someone always says, "This feels familiar," and everyone knows exactly what they mean. There's a language to it, things we say out loud and things we only imply. Terrain irregularity, communication anomaly, subject uncooperative. Each one is a placeholder for something we don't have words for or permission to describe. Official records pretend these incidents are isolated. Unofficially, we trade looks and realize the same shapes are appearing in different forests. If you think this is fake, that's fine. It's safer that way. But if you've ever felt that cold recognition reading one of those stories, I want you to pay attention. Compare details, notice patterns, share what you've seen in the comments because that's the only place this knowledge survives. What happened next proved to me these weren't one-offs or exaggerations. The forest doesn't work alone and it doesn't make mistakes. It repeats what works. And the next case made sure we understood that repetition wasn't random. It was intentional, practiced, and patient, waiting for the right moment to surface again, wearing a different face, using the same rules, daring us to notice before it called our names softly at night. The call came in just before midnight, which meant everyone was already tired and pretending they weren't. A missing teenage girl last seen hiking with her parents before she ran ahead and disappeared near the tree line. Straightforward on paper, cold air, clear sky. The kind of search we'd done dozens of times without incident. I remember thinking that if we moved fast, we'd have her back by morning, embarrassed and apologetic, wrapped in a blanket with a cup of lukewarm cocoa. We split into teams as soon as the sun dropped completely. Radios checked, headlamps on. Mason joked that teenagers always hid better than adults. Kelly told him to shut up and watch his footing. The forest felt normal at first, familiar sounds settling into the background hum of night. Crickets, wind, distant water, normal things. About an hour in, the radio crackled. "Command, this is Team 2, Mason said. We're hearing voices." Static swallowed the rest of his sentence. "Say again," came the reply. "What kind of voices?" There was a pause, then Mason's tone shifted, tight and confused. "They sound human." He cleared his throat, like someone calling out. We all stopped moving. That wasn't unusual either. Lost hikers shout. Panic carries sound farther than you expect. But then Kelly spoke up, her voice barely steady. "They're saying her name." My radio buzzed before command could respond. Another channel bled through, overlapping voices like a bad recording. "Sweetheart," a woman called softly. "Where did you go?" It was my mother's voice. I froze so hard my boots felt rooted to the dirt. I hadn't heard her call me that since I was a kid. Around me, others went still, breathing loud in their headsets. "That's not funny," someone muttered. Nobody laughed. "Stay on trail," command ordered. "Do not respond to any voices. Repeat, do not respond." The voices got closer. They knew details. Names, nicknames, old arguments, things no stranger should have known. Mason swore under his breath. "It knows my sister," he said. "She's telling me I promised." Static surged. Another voice cut in, panicked. "I see her," someone yelled. "She's right here." That was Aaron, new guy, too eager to prove himself. "She's crying. I'm going after her." Aaron, negative, command shouted. "Hold position." His radio dropped to dead air. We ran anyway. Protocol shattered under fear. The trail narrowed, branches clawing at our packs. The voices layered over each other now, coaxing, pleading, angry. My own name threaded through them, patient and precise. "If it knows your name, it's too late," Dan had said once. I understood then what he meant. We found Aaron standing just below the tree line, eyes glassy, boots half off the path. He was leaning forward like something was pulling him by the chest. "She's scared," he whispered. "She says you don't want to help." Kelly grabbed his harness and yanked him back hard. The voices cut off instantly, replaced by the rush of blood in my ears. Aaron collapsed, sobbing, insisting someone had his arm, that he could feel fingers digging in. The rest of the search was silent. Radios worked again, no more voices. We found the girl at dawn, cold but alive, curled under a log less than a mile from where she'd vanished. She said she heard us calling all night and didn't understand why we never came. We didn't tell her the truth. We never do. Later, reviewing the audio logs, we discovered something worse. The voices hadn't started mimicking us until after we'd spoken on the radios. It waited, it listened, it learned. Nobody ever hands you a list. There's no briefing where someone clears their throat and explains what really happens out there. The rules come to you sideways, learned through pauses in conversation, redacted lines, and the way veterans react when certain details come up. You follow them because the alternative is asking why they exist, and nobody who asks that ever seems satisfied with the answers. Rule 1 is simple: don't respond to repeated calls. If a phone keeps ringing from the same number, especially after it drops, you let it go. I know how that sounds. Every instinct in this job tells you to answer, to help, to make contact. But repeated calls mean something has learned how to reach you, and it's checking whether you're willing to engage. This rule exists because someone answered twice. Rule 2 is the one everyone pretends is superstition. Don't follow voices off trail. Not cries for help, not familiar names, not your own voice coming back at you from the dark. Lost people sound desperate. These voices sound patient. They wait for you to decide, and the moment you do, the trail stops being a boundary. We've lost responders that way. Officially, they slipped. Unofficially, they were invited. Rule 3 exists because someone broke it. Don't acknowledge impossible footprints. Prints that start or end without reason. Bare feet miles from a road, tracks that change shape halfway through. You log what makes sense and ignore the rest because noticing is the same as agreeing that it's real. Once you agree, it doesn't need to hide from you anymore. There are others. Don't search certain coordinates after sunset. Don't camp near areas that feel wrong even if the map says they're safe. Don't joke about hearing things you shouldn't. Humor draws attention, so does fear. Neutral is survival. The manuals say these rules conflict with logic. They do. Logic assumes the environment is passive. Experience teaches you it is. Something out there responds to behavior, tests boundaries, and adjusts when it gets results. That's why the same stories show up in different regions under different names. Park rangers in the north, desert search teams out west, mountain crews overseas, different terrain, same mistakes, same consequences. We never talked about what enforces the rules. Some people said it was the land itself. Others thought of it like a system, older than any agency, allowing us just enough access to keep things balanced. Rescue as containment, intervention as negotiation. I don't know which explanation is worse. All I know is that the rules only work if you follow them completely. You can't half ignore a voice or almost answer a call. The worst cases happen when multiple rules are broken at once, when curiosity, urgency, and compassion collide. We had one like that, a search that violated every boundary we'd learned to respect. That was when I understood the rules weren't there to protect the lost. They were there to protect us from finding something that never wanted to be rescued at all. The missing person was a middle-aged man named Harold Pike, overdue from a solo trek that should have taken one afternoon. Day 1 felt routine. Last known point marked, weather mild. No red flags beyond the fact that his truck was still at the trailhead, door unlocked, keys on the tire like he'd stepped away for a moment and planned to come back. We joked about it, uneasy humor filling the gaps where concern hadn't settled yet. By day 2, the joke stopped. We kept finding the same landmarks, a split boulder shaped like a broken tooth, a birch tree struck by lightning, bark peeled back like skin. According to our maps, we were moving deeper into new terrain. According to our eyes, we were walking in circles. GPS units disagreed with compasses. Timestamps on radio check-ins didn't line up when we reviewed them later. 15 minutes forward, 10 minutes back. Nobody could explain how. Harold's footprints appeared ahead of us every morning. Fresh, clear, always just far enough to suggest progress. Then they'd stop abruptly, toes pointed inward as if he'd turned to watch us approach. We never found signs of him camping. No food waste, no fire ring. It was like he didn't need to rest, or like rest was happening somewhere else. Exhaustion crept in quietly, not physical at first, but mental. The sense that effort wasn't accumulating, that distance meant nothing. Kelly asked me once if I remembered crossing a creek earlier that day. I did. We crossed it again an hour later, water level unchanged, boot prints still waiting on the bank where we'd left them. On the third night, we heard movement around our camp, not footsteps. Breathing, close enough to feel warm air on your neck but never close enough to see. Radios stayed silent, no voices this time, just presence. Mason whispered that he thought Harold was circling us, learning how we slept. Day 4 blurred. The maps showed we should have exited the search area by noon. Instead, the broken tooth boulder appeared again, unchanged, like a joke we weren't in on. Dan finally said what everyone was thinking. "He's not lost," he said. "He's staying." We found Harold on the 5th morning, standing in a clearing we all swore hadn't been there before. He looked fine, clean, rested. He smiled like someone greeting neighbors at a barbecue. "You took your time," he said gently. When I asked how long he'd been out there, he hesitated. "Longer than you," he replied. Walking him back felt wrong. The forest shifted around us, trees spacing themselves differently each time I looked away. My watch stopped, started again, stopped. Harold hummed under his breath, a tune I almost recognized. When we reached the trailhead, his truck was gone. The debrief lasted 10 minutes. The report was thinner than any I'd ever filed. Harold declined medical care and disappeared before anyone could stop him. Later, I realized none of us remembered crossing the boundary out of the woods, just the sudden certainty that we were back. Sometimes I wonder if we ever actually left, or if the forest just decided it was done with us for now. By the time I'd seen 3 cases that didn't make sense, I started connecting dots others refused to acknowledge. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence, lost hikers, strange terrain, miscommunication. But patterns don't lie, not if you know how to read them. Harold, the girl below the tree line, the man who walked out wrong. Each incident followed a logic we weren't meant to recognize, a sequence of behaviors and anomalies that repeated across time and space. like some invisible hand testing boundaries. The more I looked, the more obvious it became. The forest wasn't just a backdrop. It was a participant, patient and calculating. Each lost person wasn't missing in the traditional sense. They were being contained or preserved. The rules I'd learned to follow weren't for their safety. They were for ours. Search and rescue wasn't always about retrieval. Sometimes it was containment, observation, ensuring that whatever lived in those places stayed in its place. And there were signs that others knew. Internal memos marked redacted, emails deleted without trace, reports edited to remove coordinates, notes on unusual behavior marked off the books. People in other regions whispered about the same events. Park rangers, rescue teams, even local law enforcement. The stories crossed state lines, national borders. Each time the pattern resurfaced, slightly altered but unmistakable. Something ancient and territorial was tolerated because someone, somewhere, had decided it should be. Some missing people were never missing at all, not in the way we understood it. They were shifted, mirrored, copied, or observed, and the moments we thought we'd rescued them were only partial. A hand reached out, but sometimes the grip was just enough to pull us into their world instead of bringing them back into ours. I've seen evidence deleted in ways that defy explanation. Posts that existed for hours online, describing encounters in small towns, rural forests, private reserves, then gone. If this gets taken down, you'll have to trust me. They were real and they all point to the same system. A network of oversight, old rules, and people trained to follow them blindly. Even among our team, the realization spread slowly. Not everyone accepts it. Some dismiss it as hallucination, fatigue, or coincidence. But after the calls, the voices, the trails that reset themselves, the way coordinates refused to exist, we could no longer pretend these were accidents. There was a structure behind the chaos, one that only became visible when you weren't supposed to see it. It isn't just the forest. It isn't just terrain. It's something bigger, something older than any agency badge, something we've been recruited to monitor without fully understanding. The line between what we rescue and what we contain is blurry, and the consequences of ignoring that line are poorly understood. That's why no one talks about it, why reports stay redacted, and why patterns emerge only in whispers and deleted threads. By the time the next call came in, I already knew. Whatever was waiting, whatever had learned to shape itself around the rules, wasn't just testing hikers. It was testing us, and it had been doing it for far longer than I could admit without proof. And that call would push me past any safe boundary I thought existed. Here's the part I wasn't supposed to admit. I answered the call. Not right away, not while the radio screamed at me to disengage, but after the line went dead and the room felt too quiet. I told myself I needed closure. I told myself it was safer to listen than to wonder. Both of those were lies. The phone rang again at 2:43 a.m. Same number. Same empty space where the signal data should have been. I didn't log it. I didn't tell anyone. I stepped outside, away from the hum of equipment, and answered. The voice didn't sound lost anymore. It sounded pleased. It thanked me for staying. It asked if I remembered the rules, then recited them back to me perfectly. When it said my name, it used my voice, not my mother's. That felt worse. It told me it wasn't stuck in the forest. The forest was just where it practiced. It said people were easier to reach there, easier to shape. Cities were louder, messier, but not impossible. It asked how many stories like this I thought existed, and whether telling one more really mattered. When the call ended, there was no static, no goodbye, just silence so complete my ears rang. I stood there for a long time, waiting to feel normal again. I didn't. Since then, I've noticed small things. My phone lighting up without notifications. My name spoken just wrong in crowded places. Posts disappearing after I read them. If this story vanishes, if I do, understand this wasn't a warning meant to scare you. It was a confession meant to explain why some doors stay closed. I still go to work. I still answer safe calls. But every night I wonder who's really listening when the radios crackle. I don't hike anymore. I don't answer unknown numbers. And I don't talk about what I heard except here where stories blur into entertainment and truth hides better. That's the trade-off. That's the containment. You keep watching. It keeps learning. Eventually, it won't need forests or calls or rules, just attention. And you've already given it some. That's why I'm afraid to stop writing this down anywhere. If you've ever heard your name in the woods, don't assume it was coincidence.